All right, very good. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for reconvening after lunch. It's a great pleasure to see all of you. My name is Michael Buddy, and I'm an old member of the Ecclesia Project. Leave it to the Episcopalian to come up with a more genteel phrase. Thank you. Thank you all again for being together. I'm here today very much enjoying a very special sort of satisfaction. I suspect many of you have experienced this kind of satisfaction in your lives at other times. It comes from when you introduce one of your friends to someone else whom you're convinced will become their friend as well. You know they care about the same things, share the same good humor, and make people feel at ease and able to be themselves. This is a sort of good feeling I'm enjoying when I present to you today my dear friend and colleague, Chu Ilo. Stan and the people of the Ecclesia Project stand in relation to one another as friends you haven't yet met. Kindred spirits just waiting to be brought together when the occasion is right. Well, this is the occasion, and it feels good to have played a small part in new friendships and bonds coming together. As some of you know, I have been a professor at DePaul University in Chicago for 32 of my 35 full-time years in the academic world. It's a place with which I have struggled and celebrated throughout that time. It usually refused to do what I thought the church and world needed, even as it allowed me to have whatever sort of a career I ended up having. My children happily remind me of the modest accomplishments of that career, thanks in part to a customs clerk who once referred to my published works as, quote, books of no commercial value. That sums up more than 3 decades of publishing success. If I don't have much to celebrate about the reach of my scholarly work, I do admit to deriving some satisfaction, gratitude more than satisfaction actually, in having brought good people together for common work. I am most grateful for having helped bring our mutual friend Bill Kavanaugh out of the wilds of St. Paul, Minnesota to join us at DePaul in Chicago. I am also grateful for having helped bring today's plenary speaker, Chu Ilo, to DePaul as well. Together, we comprise the academic component of the university's Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology, a research center Catholic in name but ecumenical in spirit, which unfortunately has been depleted by institutional neglect and funding costs, such that 3 people are the Center for World Catholicism. That's all you need. But still, we do what we do, and we seem to have an impact beyond our size in the world of the church worldwide. My friend and colleague Stan means so much to so many people. He is a diocesan priest from Enugu, Nigeria. He is a scholar whose work is recognized around the world. He holds not 1 but 2 doctoral degrees, one in theology, one in education, in addition to advanced licentiate degrees in theology and scripture. He's held academic appointments on 3 continents, functions in more languages than I can count, and has written or edited somewhere around 20 books, but that was as of a few days ago. Don't hold me to that. Apparently lacking things to do during the pandemic, Stan earned a master's in public health for something to do. He has been the driving force and editor of a pioneering scholarly collection entitled The Handbook of African Catholicism, including more than 50 contributors from across the continent. I believe he has a copy on review outside. There's never been anything or as comprehensive as this particular book, and its usefulness and the regard in which it has been held is going to last for some time. There's more to say, but he won't let me. So it would be a mistake, of course, to confine Stan to the status of a scholar. He is a pastor, a preacher, an organizer, a troubleshooter, and so much more. With his friends and colleagues, Stan has created PACT-PAN, the Pan-African Catholic Theology and Pastoral Network, a gathering of pastoral leaders and scholars and their ecumenical and interfaith partners, where ideas are shared, projects initiated, problems addressed, and life celebrated. I'm unable to track all the projects and initiatives that Stan and his friends have launched. I'm not sure he can count them all either. But I know they range from supporting women-led economic improvement projects in 5 African countries to, most recently, I believe most recently, launching a Pan-African news network, Voice Afrique, bringing news, commentary, and features from Africans to Africans. Sometimes he's running major media sometimes he is running major projects behind the scene for leaders in the Vatican. Other times he is fielding middle of the night phone calls from distressed young Africans trying to find their way in this ordeal we call the United States. He has the right kind of enemies and the right kind of friends. And it's in adding all of us to his network of friends that I'm happy to present to you my friend, Stan Chu Ilo.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm just trying to time myself here. And thank you all for inviting me. I am highly privileged to stand before you, and it's with some trepidation that I speak to you. I had a speaking or speech impediment when I was born. So when I said to my grandmother that I wanted to be a priest, he said, "How are you going to cope?" Because for the first 5 years of my life, I was struggling with speech. So I was called Nkiti Bajiechi. In translate means one who is silent from morning until night. So I remember my dad always pushing me, go and be with your fellow kids and all that. I really struggled with speaking. So, and it happens when I begin speaking, I'm kind of stuttering, and then I get myself, and then I start to speak. So when Mike was introducing me, I was kind of, blushing, but because of my skin, you will notice that I am blushing. So, but I really, Mike has really inspired me a lot, and it's such a privilege to have him as an elder brother. So I'm going to speak on chasing hope through holy moments and sacraments of small acts of solidarity. I'm not sure how many of you remember the name Amy BL. I'd like to begin my paper with the story of the tragic death of this great American. Amy was an American anti-apartheid crusader who was killed on a trip to Cape Town while working on a Fulbright fellowship to help the transition to democracy in South Africa. Amy, a campaigner against racism, had gone down to South Africa to volunteer after graduating from Stanford University. She was 26 when she was killed in 1993 in South Africa. Amy had worked with Black comrades, registering voters, Black voters, and hoped to help fight the poverty in Black townships in a post-apartheid South Africa. Her hopes were brought to a tragic end one evening when she was dropping off two Black South African colleagues of hers. She was the target of 4 angry Black youth who had just left a rally where Blacks were calling for death to white people. These 4 young men stoned and stabbed Amy to death, despite protestation from her 2 Black colleagues that she was, quote, one of us. Amy was the first American to die in violence associated with the transition from apartheid to democracy in South Africa. But the most surprising thing that happened was that Amy's parents, Linda and Peter, forgave her killers. They actually came to the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission to support the granting of amnesty to the killers. 2 of them are now working in the Amy Bell Foundation, a charity set up to honor Amy's memory and which continues her work of helping communities in South Africa all over the continent. Good News Network captures this extraordinary witness of hope this way. Mom, worked with daughters killers to bring hope to a desperate community. Reflecting on the life and death of Amy and the witness of hope of her parents, Archbishop Desmond Tutu proposes that human beings have the latent potential of transcending the destructive suffering and pain brought upon them by evil, especially the evil that men and women who are disfiguring their humanity bring about in creation through acts of pure evil. I agree with Tutu because I too believe that we human beings can climb beyond evil. We can extend forgiveness to the most terrible individuals out there who do terrible things. And I say to you, my dear friends, that if there are some people out there with an infinite capacity to do evil, thank God that there are those of us in here who have received from God in our fragile humanity a greater capacity to do good. Because as St. Paul writes with so much conviction, where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. We as humans have an unlimited capacity for compassion, kindness, and great deeds, which emerge from a nobility of spirit, which can bring light in the midst of darkness. This unlimited capacity for good in the face of death, destruction, suffering, and pain provides small evidence that hope is that light that God shines in this world beyond the shadows. Indeed, hope is that infinite horizon that continues to extend and expand beyond the limits that evil cannot go. And I'm here, brothers and sisters, to testify that faith moves me to believe, despite what I have seen and experienced in my own life, that history is moving in the direction of goodness through our collective effort to bond together in acts of solidarity to reverse the forces of evil and death. According to Desmond Tutu, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness. This definition of hope is also reiterated by Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti, where he said that hope is something deeply rooted in every human heart, independently of our circumstances and historical conditioning. For Pope Francis, it is not the material circumstances or favorable historical context of your life that generate hope. Rather, hope is an aspiration, a thirst, a longing for something bigger and better than current circumstances. Hope, I say, is bold in its search for human and cosmic flourishing. Hope is a commitment born from faith to journey with God and all men and women of goodwill in the forward march of God's resurrecting people in the daily repairs of a broken and wounded world. Hope moves people to go beyond their personal convenience, the petty securities and compensations which limit our horizon. Hope opens us up to grand ideals that make life more beautiful and worthwhile. Hope demonstrates that the world that is often paralyzed by fear, the boundlessness of God's love through what I call those holy moments when we witness in our heroic and sacrificial acts of love those deeds of forgiveness, mercy, and justice. Hope rises when we create alternative sites of inclusion for love and friendship and fellowship. These sites that we are creating through our small acts are like sanctuaries for reimagining the future. And through it, we create a capacious tent for the weather-beaten, wearied souls of this world. Through our small sacramental acts of love, we make legible the practices of the Lord Jesus Christ as the footprints of hope that many people exhausted today by oppression and justice can see. These holy moments we create when we say to the darkness, I beg to differ, and they are evidence of what hope looks like and demonstrate to the world the fruits of the eschatological reign of God in the here and now. It seems to me that those who have seen so much suffering often see hope clearly in both their survival and resilience, which sort of give them evidence that the devouring forces of evil can never have the last say. Only the eyes that have beheld evil, suffering, and pain can truly understand and grasp the eruption of hope, even in the darkest moments. Only the one who descended into hell can show clearly to the world the possibility of a great reversal from crucifixion to the resurrection. Those who have come face to face with evil, decay, destruction, and death, those who have gone through the bitter valleys and emerge refined in the fire, are truly the ones who, like Jesus, embody resurrection hope. They have scaled the heights and limitations set by evil and refuse to be consumed by its devastating forces. They are transformed by love. They take the hand of God and journey together hand in hand with all men and women of peace and goodwill into that boundless, grace-filled reinvention of love, a new creation that is always in the making and always on the go. The early church gave us evidence of this hope. I love the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verse 1 to 10. That is usually the gospel that is read on Easter Sunday. I don't know if it is all the same in every church. It's the gospel we read in the Catholic Church. It says that early in the morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb of Jesus and saw that the tomb was empty. Jesus is risen. Jesus, our hope, is alive. Why did Jesus arise while it was still dark? Amid the thickest darkness, the light of hope rises by the gentle, victorious power of God. Amid despair and brokenness, the light of hope rises to give people courage to live again and the strength to continue to bear witness to the triumph of life over death. Hope, like the morning of the resurrection, is always being born anew every new day. Every new day, the resurrected and resurrecting people of God set out on the mission of hope by incarnating and mediating love, truth, repairing creation with that kind of single-mindedness that Jesus displayed in Luke chapter 9, verse 51, when he resolutely set his face toward Jerusalem. Every new day, we resist injustice, lies, deception, manipulation, the idols of power, nation, and money, violence, and other associated evils. We, like Mary Magdalene and the early church, gather in this sacred space today, surrounded by thick pockets of darkness in the horizon. We see in many parts of the world a vast graveyard of buried dreams, hopes, and history. A new arms race is apace in the world today. The world, like Pope Francis says, looks like an immense pile of filth. But we begin our reflection like Mary of Magdala from the empty tomb, because as believers, our hope is born from the empty tomb. We begin from this faith in the resurrection, that unconquerable power of God at work in creation, turning things around so that humanity can rise again from the ashes. It is not through our own power, like the scripture says, but by my spirit, says the Lord. As believers, the wisdom of one of my heroes, Sister Abigail Ntleko of South Africa, is as true as ever. Sister Ntileko was one of the early pioneers of a non-discriminatory approach to accompanying people who are living, as we say, positively with HIV/AIDS in Southern Africa. Her autobiography is titled With Empty Hands. She reminds Christians that the witness of hope that we are called to give emerges from a deep place and is not based on our resources, our structures and superstructures. It's not based on the number of people in our coalition. Rather, she says, every night, I take a little time to let go of the previous day. Every night, I empty my hands. And every day, I try to fill these hands with love and then spend all the love until my hands are empty again. So we are bearers of hope with empty hands, because the one who has hope, and this is me now speaking, the one who has hope is totally in the hand of God. The question which will occupy me in the second part of this presentation is then the praxis of hope, the working out of hope amid suffering. Hope is a mystery to contemplate, but I also think is a praxis to be enacted day after day. But we must remember that hope is the work of God in our frail humanity when we open ourselves to God's grace to touch us within with divine transcendence at the deepest level of our human vulnerability. Every day we begin again to pursue this hope that is sometimes elusive and fleeting, but also very incarnate and concrete. I lived in Lagos in Western Nigeria between 2000 and 2002, and I had daily encounters and conversations with many young men who hung around churches and offices and major streets, looking for menial jobs and begging for money. These young men we call in Nigeria alaye. I don't want to ask you to Google that to find the translation. Alaye means useless boys, or area boys, or, as they say in Abidjan, they call them microbes. That's like they're microbes. They're all over the place, making trouble. But I noticed one thing whenever I greeted them, because I like to actually hang out with the alayes, the troublemakers. I don't think they're useless, because I think society made them so. I say to them, how are you? Bawoni. They say, suffering and smiling. How are you? Suffering and smiling. And then I began to interrogate myself in my language, and I noticed that in Jamaica, in Haiti, here among African Americans, and in many parts of Africa, that I find different variants of this. In the morning, you say to someone, here you say, how are you? You say, fine. In my culture, they say, suffering and smiling. And that's the title of my new book, just advertising that book, coming out next month. It's called A Theology of Suffering and Smiling. So I decided to investigate this further. What do they mean, suffering and smiling? This capacity to hold the ambiguity of suffering with a smile, to hold this complexity of living in very heart-wrenching conditions, and they are dancing on the streets. Is it that they don't know more or they don't know less? I began to ask how they capture these contradictions of history, which is not just my own people, it is also my own history. That after the Civil War in my country, I was born after the Civil War. The first time I saw my father cry was when they were digging a toilet. My dad was a principal. And then they discovered a mass grave. It was fresh. When the war broke out in Nigeria, the first modern genocide in Africa, over 3 million of our people were killed, slaughtered. And my grandfather refused to leave his ancestral home because my family is the custodian of tradition. So the deity, my dad was the monarch, which he got from his father. It passed on to him. So he couldn't leave his kingdom. And we don't know what happened to him. And growing up, seeing on that night when they had seen this mass grave, my dad started to cry because then it brought together all the people he lost. Our family lost more than 18 members of our family. At night, what did we do? The ancestral ritual we did that dad led was dancing, suffering, and smiling. So when you see me dancing, don't think I'm not crying. It is my own way of crying. But then when I heard about Sister Namaika Angelique of Congo, and that's the sister there, getting to know this woman, she taught me the meaning of suffering and smiling, how hope emerges in the midst of suffering. Sister Namaika and I have been corresponding for the last 10 years. I met her in person in 2022. She is called in Congo the smile of God on a bike. The smile of God on a bike. Sister Namaika is challenging the social hierarchies which perpetuate poverty and violence against women, that force little girls into early marriage, that rape, destroy, burn. Just 3 months ago, the maternity ward in the hospital was raised down by the M23 rebels. These are all the babies born were killed. And this is what Sister is doing every day. She's fighting not with missiles or bombs or gun, but with an empty hand, a strong heart, a strong faith, and a hopeful attitude that she can do something to change the status quo. There are times when sometimes she will call me, said, the orphans, they don't have food. And I will send her money just to get her orphans fed for that week. When Sister Namaika saw in Dungu so many, thousands and thousands of young men and girls who were being forcibly displaced and abused by armed groups, especially the Ugandan Lost Resistance Army and the M23 rebels, she went to work. She worked literally with nothing, but with a strong faith and determination and courage to make a change in the lives of others. She was born in poverty and grew up in poverty. Over the last 2 decades, in and around that area, Sister has helped more than 21,000 people, mainly women and children. Right now, she has more than 400 orphans in her center for the displaced people in Dungu. And for the first 10 years, even now, Sister does not yet know how to drive. She went about doing this on a bike. And people call her God's smile on a bike because whenever she came bringing hope. She might not come with money, even sometimes she might not come with food, but she comes, as she says, to tell them that love is real, just by listening. So what is her praxis? I think 3 things that I see very clearly as I got to know her. She, first of all, hope is built on being an eyewitness to what is going on in the life of people. It's not simply long distance. Second is that hope is built on accompaniment. Hope is also built, third, on accountability. Because if there is any Christian in Congo today holding the rebels accountable, it is this woman. You see her there. This woman is tough. She has seen a lot. She bears so much pain in her life. She said, I identify these children, some of them child soldiers, and I go after the commanders. I search for them in the bush, and I bring them to my center so that they can find love. Second, she walks side by side with these women. In this site, the women tell their stories in songs, because for her, it's not just to kind of paper over the cracks. They come to tell their stories in this site, that a place that is called Tamar Space. They come to tell their stories in songs. They dance their sorrows into tears. They turn their tears into actions for social repair, denunciation of evil, resistance, and self and group efficacy, and hope through disruption. What she is doing in creating that center is a disruption of the forces of evil. She was also sharing in the suffering of the women and children, because she herself was also displaced. It's not like she was coming from a place of privilege. She describes to me in a conversation the perilous trip on foot of over 20 kilometers, sometimes with these children, trying to bring them from the bush, from their places of displacement to the center. Sometimes they walk 20 kilometers just to get to the center. And when they come, they're crying, they're despairing, they have lost their spouses, they have lost their children, they are hopeless. But once they come in here, he says, hope is born, because they trust that God will take care of them in this center. Sister Nameka was able to give account of the suffering and pain in this part of Africa. She is able to mediate hope. She didn't just simply pray or show compassion, but she went out to be with the people, to search for them in the bushes, in the pathways, and to bring in a new situation through this center where more than 110,000 people have been helped by this center. So she is a mirror through which people see how hope emerges in this broken world for people in Congo. They saw not only the face of suffering, but also they saw the smiling face of God through Sister Nameka. She is indeed a tireless worker for hope. And yes, we can say that evil and destruction are so present and so strong in Congo, but also so is hope. The obstacle that she faced and overcame are many. I don't know how she did it. Congo reveals to us who watch what is going on the human capacity for evil. But it's also a reminder of an equally powerful human capacity for strength, resilience, and courage. It's possible to see in this aching land of famine, massacre, and rape, which are really generated by human wickedness, manipulation, exploitation, and injustice. It is to see from this part some gallant species like Sister Angelique, who emerge as an ultimate test and moral exemplar of hope and restoration. Last Easter, Sister called me. You know, Sister Nameka had to leave her religious order because the sister said, what you're doing is not the vow that you took. This is not your religious vow. You shouldn't be bringing refugees and all these bad people into the convent. You know, so they started to make life really difficult for her. They say you are involved in a risky business. That's not what we want to be doing, to be negotiating with rebels. Is that what a sister should do? No. So she had to leave the community. And she called me at Easter. It was very hard. She said, we call ourselves brother. Brother, pray for me because there are many destructive forces. Many of them, sadly, within the church who wish to destroy my work. and even who wish me dead. Pray that I will rise from the dead with Christ, because, yes, I am smiling, but I am truly suffering. I cry in my heart, but I cannot let the women and children see my tears because they will become discouraged. I can only cry alone to God at night. He alone sees my tears. And then she began to cry, and we cried together, two bleeding hearts. But then I remember the text of Pope John Paul II, the text of his meditation on the Shoah when he was at the Holocaust Memorial, Yad Vashem in Jerusalem on 23rd March 2000. I have become like a broken vessel. I hear the whispering of many, terror on every side, as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. Now, in the concluding part here, what does the Church of Hope look like, and how can we be part of this march of God's people? The Church of Hope must be actively engaged in the political process, and I think this is a problem we have. It seems that from the examination of how history has evolved in Africa, that the churches are very good in responding to the suffering in the continent and celebrating the heroes who are snatching people from the mouth of death, like Sister Angelique. However, the churches have not developed the political theology or forms of protest and resistance that can reverse the historical trajectory in the continent from fragmentation to inclusive communities and social integration and transformation. If there is any lesson that we are learning from politics, both today as well as in the past, is this: democracies can all too easily degenerate into hubs of racial hatred, tribalism, genocidal nationalism, oligarchy, plutocracy, crony capitalism, and dictatorship, and you name it. As a result, there is the need for churches to become more vigilant and critically discern the economic orthodoxies and social policies and projects of nation building and global order that in my mind, in my thinking, that are manufacturing debts and destruction against the poor and the most vulnerable among us. These projects emerge from free market fundamentalism that exploits the poor and vulnerable, aggressive militarism that urges us to war, not peace, and escalating authoritarianism that tells us that diminishing our liberty is the only path to safety and making America great again. It is important that the discussion on hope does not end up with what I call pleasant poetics of hope. For hope to emerge in history, the church and God's people must move away from pleasant poetics of hope to a prophetic praxis of hope. The pleasant poetics of hope is the all too familiar reaction to social problems or atrocities in the world, where church leaders and Christians and ministers use spiritual platitudes to drown the historical injustice and deep human pain borne by those who suffer, or through condemnation of evils with effete bromide. Our thoughts and prayers are with you always. It is also found in the pleasant and feel-good prayers and wishes to the poor and the victims of history. God will take care of you. God will turn things around, and things will be well someday. But we don't tell them how this new day will dawn if the churches and believers do not act in concert to be the agents of the reversal of injustice and social sins. So I invite you to the praxis. And how does this work? I think that, I have so many things I've written here, but Sean Copeland, in Knowing Christ Crucified, he helps make this praxis of hope clear. When she makes a case for lament, Lament that begins with a confession of sin for the complicity of the church and all agencies in this act of violence against blacks, slavery, lynching, racism, violence against black bodies, and ongoing destruction of the African continent. The confession of sin she proposes should also be a movement of conversion, soul searching, and seeking new ways of acting and being part of the struggle to defeat evil by placing the promise of hope within the horizon of concrete time and circumstances. In its orientation towards eschatological hope, lament and mourning are manifestations of hope, as Katongole argues. But then there is the important component of African American theological reasoning on lament that Copeland brings out, which I think is not present in a lot of African theologians of hope. First, lamenting must name and denounce evil and injustice. It is a protest, a form of protest, not fighting God, that is protest theism, or denying God, that is protest atheism, but a protest against unjust structures. For we know those who are destroying God's creation, and we must confront them in a way that Jesus did. Second, lament is a public grieving, the kind that Sister Nameka shows us. It's public. It's not simply private, because evil is demonstrated publicly. We see the infrastructures of evil all over. So it's not simply something that is pietistic that we can just do in our sanctuaries and in our churches. There must be a public demonstration by creating spaces of recognition and some form of catharsis that can then courageously make a case for reparation of justice, for memory, so that those who have been devoured by evil can live again. Third, lament must equip the oppressed so that they are not succumbing to learned helplessness. Because as we know from, I think, the healing of the demoniac at Gennesaret, evil, if you chase it away, it comes back actually re-equipped. It develops new strategies, and then it can take you by surprise. So lament, I say, must serve as a furnace that will release spiritual energies in order to meet the forces of evil with a greater force of justice and restoration. Lament must begin within a conversion of relationship, an embrace of cosmic Ubuntu that restores and strengthens a bond of love between all people in a non-transactional daily act of self-sacrificing gift of ourselves to others. Now, I'd like to conclude with a proverb. One is, you hear extra ecclesiam nulla salus. I think John Zizilao says that now, outside the church, there is no salvation. I say, can there be hope outside the church? And what kind of hope is the church giving that people cannot find elsewhere? Indeed, what makes the church is hope. For in my own case, the church today in Africa cannot be credible if it does not embody hope, not just by words, but by living in a different way. If our churches are complicit with forces of darkness, if the pride of self and the church, rather than being a wounded healer, becomes a wounding church, then there is no hope for the poor. So there is a Swahili saying that says, "Mtunikamanti huzamatunda kulingana na mzizi yake." A person is like a tree. They bear fruit according to their roots. The church, I think, is that garden that God has planted, where the seed of hope is being planted. The church must plant this seed. And there are some trees growing in this garden that are weather-beaten, that are dying, that are destroying. How can we water these seeds again? Finally, when I think of what is going on in Gaza, I think of my childhood that I just told you. I was born after the Civil War in Nigeria. For 3 years, the enclave called Biafra was blockaded from food, from water, from any supply at all. The word kwashiorkor, I don't know anyone here, you know what is kwashiorkor? It was used for the first time in Biafra. It's a Ghanaian word. People did not know how to explain the distension of the debate. My sister suffered that. And no wonder she died early, because those children who had kwashiorkor from this blockade lived with different kinds of comorbidities. So when I see what is going on in Gaza, I think of myself. I say it could have been me. I remember my own sister who suffered kwashiorkor. And I think that the challenge today is not just genocide, it's what I call silencide. Silencide is the word I invented. In the face of the worst atrocity that humanity is watching in the 21st century, we have all kind of become anesthetized to this horror through our silence and seeming inability to resist this killing machine that Noam Chomsky, the eminent Jewish American, once referred to as the most extreme and sadistic form of imperialism. So, where is hope? When you think of the fact that the British supplied the arms that killed 3 million of my people, and no one has accounted for it. The same thing is happening today in Gaza. America is supplying the weapons, killing people, and then providing whatever you call it, death traps or humanitarian response, as if to say that war is okay as long as it serves to create conditions for distributing humanitarian aid. Judith Butler reminds us of the non-grievable victims of war. Can you see in yourself these people who are dying? Or when you hear about gun violence in the United States, it is a specific exploitation of targeted populations of lives that are not quite lives anymore. Their lives are destructible and ungrievable, as Butler says, because they are losable. They can be forfeited and left to the vagaries of violence, famine, flooding, hurricanes, poverty, war, racism, pandemic, oppression, and depression. When such lives are lost, it's just a number. It's just another day. I'd like to conclude with 3 important points that I have taken from my understanding of Catholic theology of hope. First, hope must take evil seriously. Evil is not just a temporary phase in history. It is part of the chaos that we must constantly, courageously, and prophetically wrestle with. That's why the Son of God died on the cross. But hope is built on the assurance that evil will not have the last say. Our people in Nigeria suffer so much destruction, but the seed of faith, community, and compassion also emerged from the ashes of that destruction. Second, hope is not passive. It is active, it is a praxis, it's not a wish, it's not just expectation, it is missionary, always moving out to the other. It's not motionless. Believers must know that evil is not transformed simply by patient prayer and pietistic faith, that God will fill every hole in our lives. Thus, Rather than fight with God or demons, as I often say to my fellow Africans who spend a lot of time actually fighting demons, like the president of Kenya is on to it again. He wants to build a gigantic church in the State House. And people say, you shouldn't do that. The young people are looking for a job. He said, all those who are criticizing me are demonic and they're witches and they practice witchcraft. But the one who is sucking the blood of the people is in the State House, not witches and wizards. So finally, the kingdom of God is here. This calls for joy amidst the setbacks and disappointments of life. But the realization, even in small ways, of the eschatological fruits of God's kingdom invites us, in the words of the old Negro spiritual, to rejoice. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of the new day. Let us march on till victory is won. Thank you.